Chris, welcome to the show, man. Good to have you.
Good to be with you, John. Thanks for having me, man.
For sure. So for those who don't know you yet, can you give kind of a brief intro of who you are and Investec and what y'all do?
Yeah, so I'm a macro strategist that's what I used to do professionally. Was an economist, a macro strategist for about 10 years, from 2008 through to 2017. Was doing sell-side research. So in other words, for our institutional stock brokerage business at Investec, which is a commercial bank and investment bank, I was basically doing macro strategy research to our asset management clients. I'm doing a lot of work on the credit risk side. The areas that I focused on for a couple of years was African economies and frontier market economies. And I became interested in the kind of intersection of frontier technologies, specifically monetary technologies, and frontier markets. And so when I started, the pieces of the puzzle started fitting together for me there around 2016. I motivated to the bank that we needed a role focusing specifically on these blockchain technologies. And so that's what I've been doing since then.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, that kind of intersection that would certainly bring you to Bitcoin eventually. It took you there pretty early, actually. Also, we have a lot of amateur economists in the space, so it's good to talk to someone who's been there professionally too. So Investec, commercial and investment bank. I guess can you talk a little bit more about kind of Bitcoin specifically? You made that kind of call in 2016. This new position organization was created inside the bank. Can you talk a little bit about how you see Bitcoin being relevant to your client base today, and some of those kind of conversations that you're having, 4 years after 2016?
Yeah, look, so our client base is unique. So basically, Investec, we operate in South Africa, also the UK and Australia, as well as Mauritius. But in South Africa specifically, we focus. The division that I'm in is the private banking business. And we focused on very high net worth clients. So we have quite a small client base, around 90,000 clients in total down here in South Africa, but all high net worths. And so the typical client has disposable income, and he's able to take risk in some of these new assets, things that are a bit edgier to traditional bank. So what we saw in our sort of client base was a reasonable amount of activity around crypto assets and Bitcoin, funds flowing to exchanges, doing an arbitrage trade and these sorts of things. Obviously we needed to do quite a bit of work getting people comfortable with having a division that focuses on these new assets, these prices. Obviously, Bitcoin got a bit of a bad rep around 2012, 13 with the Silk Road and all sorts of things around that. And your more senior bankers didn't like the reputation that it had. So we had to do a lot of work internally with compliance just to understand the asset, to find out how the flow of funds work, to kind of get a grip on that, to see whether there's anything we could do for clients to add value for them in this ecosystem, with something like Bitcoin. And what we really started realizing is that as a bank, as Investec, we're operating across the world in multiple currencies, depending on the jurisdiction that we're in. In fact, in Mauritius, it's different to South Africa. The bank operates on multiple currencies, whereas in South Africa, it's really just rand. And so you're not really constrained as a bank in terms of what currencies you operate with. And so if you agree then that Bitcoin is just a new currency, you just need to find a way to bank on top of it, really. And so that's what we've been exploring in the last few years. Yeah,
cool. And I guess the news out of South Africa, one of the reasons that I wanted to chat with you this week was news of Luno kind of being acquired by DCG, one of their early investors, based in New York, obviously. So that happened, but first, kind of Bitcoin in South Africa a little bit more generally. Can you kind of help us, kind of give us some context for adoption of Bitcoin in South Africa, kind of what the media narratives have been, what they are now, just a little bit of context?
Yeah, look, so South Africans generally have become increasingly distrusting of the state. And so what you tend to see here, and also in other African countries, is that theme. And then as a result of that, what you tend to see is people looking for alternatives, looking for hedges to the currency, looking for ways to protect their savings and wealth. And so as a result of that, you see it's, you can gauge interest from South Africans towards Bitcoin by looking at the level of Google searches for Bitcoin. And South Africa and Nigeria ranks really highly in the world in terms of Google searches. So interest is high. There's this sort of this environment where adoption happens more easily here. We have a pretty sophisticated financial system, so it's not like people need it necessarily, but people are just interested to get connected up to some of these new networks and systems. So I'd say that's the one thing. And then the Bitcoin business landscape has also obviously come in leaps and bounds. Luno back in 2013, I think they were one of the first Bitcoin exchanges in SA. At the time, they were called BitX. And I remember, becoming a client. I can't remember exactly if it was 2013 or 14.
Okay, yeah.
But at the time, you had to basically download like a legal agreement. There was a stack of papers that you had to go through and physically sign and kind of scan and send back to them to get onboarded as a client. Yeah. And I thought to myself, like, no, this is just too much of a mission. Like, who's going to do this? This isn't going to work. It's too much admin and too much friction. But the rate at which things have evolved to remove friction from these businesses in South Africa has been tremendous. And so it's much easier for people to get onboarded into the space. And that's obviously what we're seeing. And I would also add specifically what we've seen since March is the government here implemented quite a harsh lockdown, more stringent than most countries in the world. That's had some dire economic consequences. And so we're also seeing people questioning the sort of the value of the rand, which is the local currency, over the longer term. And as a result, we've seen quite a big uptick of adoption, client onboardings to businesses, crypto exchanges and the like. And trading volumes have also spiked around 300-400% on the bigger crypto exchanges in South Africa. So yeah, there's definitely an adoption that's taking place down here.
So your private banking clients, you are seeing an uptick right now, actually, and people interested in, I guess, stores of value, Bitcoin being one potential there. Is there?
Yeah, just to say, that's not specifically just our client base, but also activity on the exchanges as well. So more generally, outside of just what I can see inside the bank, there's a very strong uptick. Cool.
And then kind of the regulatory situation for Bitcoin. Can you give us some color there? Has there been much debate around it? Is it set in stone? What's the, your bank is treating Bitcoin kind of as another currency. How does the government in South Africa see it?
Yeah, so the government's diverse. There have been many regulatory bodies, but they've been really proactive in trying to understand this ecosystem, crypto assets generally. The South African Reserve Bank, which is our central bank, set up basically a fintech team a couple of years ago, and started with some really good people who have been getting a handle on this asset, and they put out a few papers. They also recently created a body called the Intergovernmental FinTech Working Group, or the IFWG, which is comprised of the central bank, the sort of banking regulators at the central bank, the authorities who manage exchange control, which we have down here, the tax authorities, the conduct authorities. All these regulatory bodies are part of it, and they've actually set up a regulatory sandbox where any incumbent businesses or even new innovative businesses launching products where their regulatory gray areas are able to move into in order to launch these products to market, but get some level of regulatory exemption to prevent getting fines and stuff. So they've been quite proactive. They've been really good to try and move the ecosystem along. But compared to the rate at which blockchain and crypto assets and Bitcoin generally is moving, it's not at the same pace. So you continuously see this dislocation. But yeah, there's been great stuff that's been taking place, so it's been encouraging to see. I would add the one big issue that we have, I'd say issue to starting up businesses that do cryptocurrencies is we have exchange control. And obviously Bitcoin doesn't care about borders, and so when you have exchange control, there's a lot of uncertainty around what you can and can't do. Even if you're a custodial, you're doing Bitcoin custody as a business, but you're inside South Africa and you're managing the keys from South Africa, the regulators are angling to call that an offshore asset, even though the keys are managed here. So there's some issues that need to be ironed out around there, create some uncertainty, and I think it does slow things down to an extent. But again, the exchange control regulators are also like trying to understand this and trying to put some frameworks in place just to give people clarity and comfort, you know, to invest and do business.
Yeah, interesting. And when you say exchange controls, what does that encompass exactly? It's capital controls on money leaving South Africa specifically, or is it essentially what it is? What is the cap on that right now?
So it depends who you are. So if you're an individual, you can take out R1 million, which is less than $100,000, right? Less, $50,000 odd, freely without having to ask for permission to externalize that capital. So in other words, if you want to sell rands to buy dollars to be able to invest offshore, you can only take R1 million offshore sort of frictionlessly. The minute you exceed that, you can go up to 11 million rand in total, but you have to basically ask for permission from the tax authorities to do that. Again, a lot of friction around doing that. If you start up a business in South Africa, let's say you want to start up a crypto exchange and you want to receive funding through some new instruments like safe agreements, those aren't recognized yet, and you can't bring the capital into the country either.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So it's really just to try and manage capital inside the country, inflows, outflows. It's challenging.
Yeah. And what has inflation been? I guess a reported inflation been over the last couple of years in South Africa and the rand this year. What's it looking like?
So our central bank targets an inflation rate of between 3 to 6%. Historically, they sort of hug the upper bound. You know, they around 5%.
Yeah, 3 to 6. That's a nice little range.
So it's quite, it's a big range, and then they hug the top end of that. So the currency has depreciated significantly over the last few decades, relative to the dollar and gold and so on. At the moment, the inflation rate measuring the increase of consumer prices is cruising around 3% per year. It's around there.
Yeah. Okay. And then thanks for all that context. And then to Luno. So come a little bit of a ways since you started trying to set up an account there in 2013 when it was under a different name. Can you, I guess, talk a little bit about kind of the background of the exchange, maybe a little bit of that exchange kind of competitive landscape too, and how it's developed over those last 7 years? Just some color for who Luno is and how they're seen in South Africa, I guess.
Yeah, so I mean, Luno has been kind of the standard, I would say, as a crypto exchange in South Africa. It was one of the first. It grew pretty rapidly. They obviously rebranded to Luno a couple of years ago. I can't remember exactly when that was, but they're pretty trusted. You know, they got good investment backing early on from the likes of Naspers and Rand Merchant Investments, which is also an investment bank's investment arm. A very reputable investment bank.
I didn't realize Naspers had invested. That's interesting.
What's that?
I didn't realize that Naspers had invested.
Yeah, they just exited now, I think,
Gotcha.
With this DCG deal. And they grew very strongly. I mean, they were just solid. Never too many issues. They were good on client support. There was great liquidity and volumes. They really focused on the Bitcoin Rand pair. They were never quick to add other pairs, currency pairs, to the exchange. I think even now, at the moment, they only have 4 or 5 pairs on the exchange. And I think there's a market for Bitcoin Rand, XRP Rand, and also ETH Rand. I do think they did add BCH as well not so long ago, but I speak under correction. And so they were good, they were solid, they grew fast, had a lot of clients, obviously expanded into Africa. So they also played into that remittance theme, for people wanting to move capital between places around Africa. They were there and people trusted them. Things have obviously shaken up a bit, I think, especially in the last year when a team of guys from an investment bank left and formed Valor.com. And they built a really slick platform, competed really hard with Luno on fees. Yeah. And kind of came in aggressively. And they also were a bit more liberal, if I can call it that, in the number of cryptocurrencies that were added to the platform. So you had this huge selection, like 50 cryptos that people could trade, buy and sell. And so
something that something that's been important and competitiveness of exchanges all over the place. It seems like the ones that have been more fast fad things have seen that better retail growth. Just to your point.
Yeah. So Valor came in, I think about a year ago, just over a year ago. They started their Rand Bitcoin book, and they've grown really rapidly. So you've got quite a nice equal footing of two big players, and then a variety of smaller players. But really, Luno and Valor are the dominant guys right now. So it'll be interesting to see how, with the DCG investment, how they begin to move and what products they begin to add. Just to try and make, if you can call it, a bit of a comeback locally.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then Valor, I guess the way that the Luno is set up, maybe it's not technically a South African company, and Valor is. It's based in, I guess, Johannesburg.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Okay.
No, Luno has been really successful, obviously, at expanding offshore and externalizing IP in the business to make this investment more attractive. But I think it does give the local crypto industry a lot of credibility and legitimacy, not only in the eyes of international investors, but also local financial industry players.
Yeah, that's interesting, because we haven't really seen a ton of M&A on the African continent of Bitcoin companies. It's maybe one of the first kind of noteworthy plays on that front. And Luno, I mean, it sounds like it was made because of that base of customers in South Africa. And you mentioned the offshore IP and whatnot, but I guess the real differentiator for Luno, it seems like, is that foothold that it has had in South Africa. Any color for that setup, and kind of as companies think about maybe entering markets in Africa, maybe South Africa specifically, the way Luno did it, obviously that was 7 years ago, but and Valor's South African grown and located. Are you seeing any other kind of trends on that front of companies entering Africa versus starting homegrown there? Any other color on that? It's kind of a roundabout way of asking a simple question.
I don't see. Look, I'm not in the sort of investment side of things. So I'm not a VC guy myself. I don't have really good insight on these sort of dynamics and trends. But I mean, I'm not seeing many international crypto businesses coming here to set up shop. What I see of local businesses, there's obviously a big focus in moving abroad to capture a bigger market, whether it's Africa or Asia, other markets. There's a focus around ensuring that IP can be externalized so that you're not caught up in exchange controls when you want to get investment eventually.
Makes sense. Yeah. Any other kind of color on I guess the customer base, maybe one of the main reasons for the purchase? You've kind of gone through the competitive aspect of Luno versus Valor. Any sense of kind of the level of that customer base? Is it pretty much retail, some institutional? Like when y'all talk to private banking clients, maybe you can't get into specifically your clients, but when you talk to people who are buying Bitcoin, trading Bitcoin, where do you see kind of the high net worth folks going, the institutional side, hedge funds and whatnot? Any color on that?
Yeah, so in SA, there's two things I want to kind of touch on. The first thing is our regulators here have been basically trying to keep institutions away from this asset class for now. So they don't really want to see institutional facing business for crypto happening just yet. And that comes back to exchange control concerns that they have. So they're concerned that if institutions start getting into the space, you're going to see much larger amounts of outflows taking place, outflows into crypto. And they don't have a handle on it, and it's harder to control. And so they've really been trying to push back institutions from getting involved. institutions, of course, are able to get involved because they are allowed to invest offshore. So typically, they'll go to custodians and exchanges offshore. So Fidelity Investments would be one, Gemini, Coinbase, these types of players is who they would deal with. I think because you can see this, or mostly institutions will see this as a foreign currency, they would also like to isolate sovereign risk from South Africa and, have these assets custodies offshore too. So that's kind of the trend you're seeing from institutions. We're not really seeing corporates involved with the stuff, but businesses are setting up. I'm seeing a lot of activity in businesses who want to facilitate individuals and help individuals to trade the arbitrage, offshore, onshore Bitcoin arbitrage.
Okay.
And I've seen quite a bit of interest from international businesses here too. So how this works is the price of Bitcoin offshore in dollars is 5% lower than it is here when you factor in your FX conversions and costs of converting into Forex. Mm-hmm. So as an individual, or as anyone really, you can sell rands, buy dollars, deposit it into, let's say, a Kraken account, buy Bitcoin, transfer it back to Luno, and sell it for a 5-6% profit, just about net of fees. Mm-hmm. It's a very attractive flow. But again, the regulators don't want businesses engaging in that because they don't understand this flow dynamic. So they said, look, individuals can do it if you stick within your exchange control allowances. But it's quite sophisticated and it's a bit tricky for people to get involved in trading if they've never traded in their lives. For sure. Now you want to ask them to start trading crypto and deposit and withdraw from Kraken in these places is kind of risky and hard to do. So we're seeing a lot of businesses setting up to facilitate that flow for individuals and to make it easy.
Yeah, interesting.
So we've seen a lot of activity around that.
Yeah, I think BitPace has played in that kind of space over there, history too. Any other, I guess maybe back to Investec a little bit. So, you're heading up essentially the product and strategy on the crypto side there, on the blockchain side there. I believe y'all have some custody. Y'all been working on some custody things. Talk a little bit about that, how you're thinking about kind of product inside the bank. You mentioned kind of custody is something that people have been going outside of South Africa for a little bit. Just talk about your strategy there, how you're thinking about it.
Yeah, so like I was saying, if you're a bank and you can just view this as another currency, mm-hmm. and you want to offer these technologies to clients, and whether it's Bitcoin or Ether or even stable, that's the primary thing that you use to connect to a blockchain. And so what we've been working on is a very asset agnostic custodial solution, which we built. And we announced in March at the Blockchain Africa conference that we built this, and we're ready to start testing this, with the clients. So a small number of staff clients, just to start testing these capabilities, and then to work with regulators around solving some of the regulatory gray areas that they have question marks over, that we think we've solved for, mm-hmm. in order to demonstrate that it would be possible for a bank to get involved in this, as they do with any other currency. There's some quirks around this technology, but the minute you get a handle on that, the remit and capabilities of banks to get involved. And obviously what's been really helpful to us has been the US Office of the Comptroller of the Currency a couple of months ago came out and gave federal banks and thrifts basically the green light to do digital asset custody too. And so what we're seeing from regulators here is they look to industry for guidance, players like us, but also the crypto incumbents like Luno and they also look offshore.
Hey, let's
to the Bank of International Settlements and the SEC and the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. Yeah, so I was saying as the guidance comes out from abroad, it gives us legitimacy and a bit more momentum to move forwards on projects like this. So yeah, it's pretty exciting that we've been able to get to the point that we're at, and we're looking forward to obviously bringing something to the market soon.
For sure, all interesting stuff, good stuff. And then kind of timing on that, when you can bring it to the market, or I'm sure you're in discussions, continually with the powers that be. Any kind of thoughts on when this is coming?
Yeah, I don't actually know. I wish I could say. There's testing that needs to happen. There's internal processes that need to be closed off. So there's quite a bit of stuff that still needs to happen, but hopefully soon. Soon in a banking context, especially now, is not what it used to be either. So it's hard to say.
For sure. And sorry, I think my internet connection is I think it's me and not you. My internet connection is slowing us down a little bit.
Oh, you clear on my side?
I'm clear on your side. All right, cool. I can edit this a little bit too afterward.
Yeah, the interesting thing, just a bit of color from inside a bank is there's this interesting divergence of opinion and view on these technologies as well as the assets. What you find is in the technology community at a bank is there's a lot of interest and appetite to get involved in these things. Mm-hmm. Whereas on the banker side, there's less understanding of technology and how these new systems work, and so you get this tremendous conflict and tension the whole time. Which is why you typically see fintechs adopting these things faster and the tech players moving into the space more quickly. And so we've had to do a lot of work to get the banking fraternity inside the bank, the more traditional banker comfortable with this stuff and how it all works.
For sure.
It takes a couple of years, but you get there.
Yeah, I mean, 4 years ago is when you kind of pushed this internal initiative. We're got into it. So you're seeing traction internally in terms of how open people are. You're seeing traction externally in terms of trading volumes, high net worth folks wanting to get into at least get some exposure to Bitcoin. Any other color on kind of the Bitcoin, the ecosystem of Bitcoin companies in South Africa? Anything else you're bullish on? Anyone else of note that you'd kind of hold up and say, hey, these guys are doing some interesting stuff as well?
On Bitcoin specifically, it's gone quite quiet. I haven't seen a lot of activity around Bitcoin specifically. Mm-hmm. There was some talk of players doing building Lightning network integrations and on-ramps, but that's gone kind of quiet. Lightning started off pretty rapidly and grew quickly to I think 30,000 channels or something 2 years ago, but it seems to have gone quiet. And mm-hmm. What I have seen happening is quite a bit of developer mindshare moving across onto Ethereum and some of these DeFi applications. And there's been some success stories locally around that. There's a guy by the name of Andre Cronje who built Yearn.finance out of Cape Town.
Yeah.
And he released it to the market in July. He released a governance token, and within 48 days, I think it hit $1 billion market cap. And so yeah, there's some interesting stories like that's coming out. Not a lot of companies that I'm seeing being registered, but a lot of people. These smart contracting systems give people the ability to register businesses on the chain and to operate in a sort of parallel dimension, Mm-hmm. And so I'm seeing a lot of interest going there.
Interesting. And, it seems like South Africa maybe was one of the places that Consensus made a big push to develop an Ethereum ecosystem there, hired some local people. Any thoughts on kind of the importance of that kind of focused outreach versus kind of the more distributed nature of Bitcoin's kind of the push for Bitcoin?
Yeah, so look, I'll say that Consensus basically did the project for the Reserve Bank. So what we did a couple of years ago is we tokenized the Rand on Quorum, which is their private blockchain. I don't know what's happened with that since the JP Morgan deal, but on this private chain, we tokenized the Rand to basically demonstrate the ability to create a new settlement system that's decentralized on Ethereum, on a private Ethereum chain. And consensus basically drove that project. I think it was 2 years ago. And what they did was it gave the regulatory bodies quite a bit more understanding of how Ethereum works, what it's useful for, how transactions will get processed, and how the ecosystem and the various things fit together. And so as a result of that, I see inherently increased levels of comfort with Ethereum.
Interesting.
So that's really interesting. Whereas, with Bitcoin, very decentralized, you don't quite know who to talk to understand it. Who can you trust? Who are the authorities on it? So it's quite a different dynamic. And that doesn't mean to say, obviously, that Bitcoin's not important. It obviously is. It's still the most important asset. But there's a level of comfort with Ethereum and some of the ecosystem that consensus was able to bring. They also hired Monica Singer, as you mentioned a few hires. And Monica Singer was the CEO of Straight, which is our central securities depository, like a very important financial institution in SA. And she was CEO of that, I think, for 30 years. And so she's extremely well known amongst the C-level execs in the financial services industry, and she was able to communicate with these people too and tell them about Ethereum and how it works and smart contracts and all this kind of stuff. So you automatically just see a sort of increased level of adoption and uptake and comfort amongst people. Whereas with Bitcoin, it's seen as, our CEO who's actually left the bank used to joke with me and kind of look under the table and said, "Who are these Bitcoin miners? Who are they? Who are they?"
Yeah.
It was a big joke, but whereas with Ethereum, you kind of start putting faces to the thing.
That's interesting. Okay, and that comes with a whole set of trade-offs, obviously. And I know you're a Bitcoiner, and that's why you're in the game here. And I believe you, I think you may have, from kind of the economist side, back to that a little bit. You may have started maybe a Mises Institute in South Africa, or run the one there. Talk a little bit about that. Just kind of how you think about economics, I guess.
Yeah, so when 2009 happened, I was just starting off as an economist. I'd started in 2008, and I was doing African markets and macro. And the crash obviously happened, and it caught everybody off guard. I was like, what's going on here? How does everybody get something this big so wrong? And I became really curious around what I'd been taught about economics at university, and started asking questions, and consistently saw an explanation and a predictive ability from people that constantly led me back to the Austrian School of Economics. And so I started getting into the Austrian school, and I went on to Mises.org and reading the books and just immersed myself in the theory of the Austrian school. And so in 2011, at that point, I was pretty much just gold. Gold is the solution. Gold's going to solve the financial and currency problems. You have to go back to a gold standard, and the gold price is going to have to reset dramatically higher to sort of balance the books, so to speak. And it was also around that time when a friend and I founded the Mises Institute South Africa, which is really just a small kind of passion project to start a think tank to get people to understand what the Austrian School of Economics is about. Obviously, a big sort of an important principle of the Austrian School of Economics is to firstly have sound money. So a currency that's not corruptible and debasable by anyone. And so that's where the gold angle kind of came in, as this market money that couldn't be debased. Competition. So if you had competition amongst monies, the Hayekian argument in his book, The Denationalization of Money, there would be incentives that would always lead the soundest or the scarcest monies to be the most valuable and in the most demand, and as a result would become the standard for money. And so with that sort of way of thinking and of analyzing the world and business cycles and currency systems and fiat fractional banking and all of these things, it's where I became interested in Bitcoin. That's what led me to it. But initially, I'm not a tech guy, so I couldn't get it immediately. In principle, I was like, no, this is a good idea, but if I've got to sign up with BitX, which is now Luno, and I've got to print out these documents and sign a legal agreement in order to buy this, and then at that point, there weren't light wallets. You know, you couldn't have a wallet on your device. I had to spin up a node at home. My wife said to me, like, no, you're not going to use a room to spin up nodes on my computer. I just thought to myself, this isn't going to work. Like, this can't really work. So what I kind of overlooked at the time was the technical piece and how easy it would be to innovate for anyone to build applications to make this thing better, more useful, and to reduce friction. And so when I kind of came back to it again, and I started noticing, well, hang on a second, I didn't realize how quickly this ecosystem would evolve and become more efficient and more useful. That's when I realized, okay, I think it might be Bitcoin over gold. And I started understanding the trade-offs between digital gold and something like Bitcoin, which doesn't need collateral. It is the collateral asset, you know, it is the bearer instrument. And so it was, so the Austrian School of Economics was incredibly helpful to leading me down this path of getting involved with Bitcoin and crypto more generally.
Yeah, good color there. Your mind was right. I guess we're talking about Bitcoin standard now. How is gold regulated in South Africa? Is it easy to move kind of gold in and out? Is it similar? I guess it's same thing in terms of capital controls, I guess. Just thinking about some of these, I guess we've had some headlines.
You know, interestingly, gold, you know, the Kruger Rand obviously comes from SA. It's like it's the standard for gold coins around the world.
I didn't know that.
In huge demand. It's actually still legal tender in SA. So you can go, you know, it's legal tender. So you can use it as a medium of exchange at a point of sale, you know, and people would have to accept it. Obviously, you don't do it because a Kruger Rand's worth a lot and you're not going to buy the groceries with it. But the central bank here, because it's legal tender, will at any point in time, if you show up at their door and you want to sell them Kruger Rands, they'll pay you out spot price for those Kruger Rands.
Interesting.
So it's quite a cool bit of history around Kruger Rands. There's a bit of innovation going on. There's one fintech called Troy Gold specifically, who's digitizing Kruger Rands and giving people the ability to basically spend that, you know. Use it as
because it's digitized gold, it's automatically going to be adopted as legal tender, or is there a discussion around that?
Yes, exactly.
Interesting.
That's the play. Exactly. Yeah.
And the price is it floating or is it pegged to the rand somehow?
No, the price floating? It's floating. Yeah. So thankfully we still have a floating exchange rate. Yeah. So the price of Kruger Rands in SA is basically just the rand conversion of, you know, the spot gold market offshore.
Gotcha.
It's fixed to the London bullion market. So I think twice daily the price is fixed. And if you walk into a sort of Kruger Rand coin, many coin shops where you can go and buy and sell these things, you basically pay whatever the most recent fix was.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, they also don't charge tax on Kruger Rands. That's obviously a discussion that's also going to be happening soon, is around tax on crypto. You know, so like if you buy Kruger Rands because it's legal tender, that doesn't apply to Kruger Rands. But if you want to buy silver, you pay tax. So there's a 15% markup on it. Now it would obviously be problematic for Bitcoin if Bitcoin was treated like silver, you know, and 15% VAT was going to be added on. It's kind of not an active discussion at this point. We're going to have to see where it goes. I think the tax authorities are really just trying to get a handle on how to keep tabs on profits in crypto, you know, and to make sure that people are paying their taxes. And so hopefully that discussion around VAT is further off in the future. You know, we'll have to see.
Yeah, interesting. And that kind of tax discussion, I guess it's probably a little bit more of a timely thing, I guess, with the impact of COVID maybe in South Africa and government revenues there. Any color on how you mentioned it was more of a harsh lockdown, more of a, I guess, strictly enforced lockdown than some other places in the world. Where does it sit now? Is it and the impact of that on South African business, inflation, Bitcoin? You've touched on it a little bit, but any kind of final thoughts on that front, COVID's impact?
Yeah, look, the impact on the economy has been pretty severe. I think that the GDP number that came out a couple of weeks ago showed that the economy contracted at an annualized rate of 50% in the second quarter. I think the third quarter is going to could be just as bad. We're still in levels, we still have stages of lockdown, so I think we've just moved to stage 1, but there's just so many restrictions on activity still. It's kind of hard to see just how much things will rebound. I think the bigger impact's been on government finances. So government finances have been, you can say, fragile leading into this, and this may push things over the edge. And I think that's why there's increased interest in things like Bitcoin too. Because obviously if you have a fiscal crisis, which I think may be quite likely in the next few years, it obviously has negative consequences for the rand. You know, a bit of context into why I moved into this space too is with my sort of knowledge of high inflation and hyperinflation environments in African countries. You know, we had a hyperinflation in Zimbabwe just north of our borders not so long ago.
Yeah.
These things can happen quickly, and it can unravel. And I think the promise of Bitcoin in an environment like this is that hyperinflations are never going to be the same as before. You know, suddenly you have an alternative that you can move into seamlessly that runs on the internet, that's electronic, where you can kind of hedge yourself and you can continue to transact in a value that's reasonably stable, even if your local currency is unhinged and extremely unstable. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see, you know, just to watch things play out here and even in other African countries over the next decade, to see how Bitcoin might come in to solve some of these macro problems that create like systemic crisis, where communities can potentially pick up a new currency like Bitcoin and start transacting in that to be able to store the value of their savings, to transact with each other, in order not to go down that hyperinflationary or high inflation slope. You know.
Absolutely, that is one of the miracles of Bitcoin. And that the potential of that is real. It's gonna be interesting to watch. Any kind of predictions on Bitcoin? I guess just overall predictions. Any broad predictions on Bitcoin? Have anything for us for the next year, 2 years? What it looks like? Obviously, everyone's kind of on the same page. They're entering a bull market here. What do you see happening in South Africa, maybe?
Yeah, look, I mean, we're going to be led by what's happening in the world, you know. So those, and I think the themes are very similar. We might just be a few years further down the road of you know, concern around the local currency and the levels of inflation that we might see. I think those things might come sooner, and that's, like we said earlier, that's why we see sort of higher levels of adoption amongst the public for Bitcoin. I am, however, starting to see more institutions here getting interested, which is the same theme that we're seeing abroad, you know, with banks getting more comfortable and institutional investors getting in, MicroStrategy buying how many $100 million worth of Bitcoin. You know, those are the things that are going to move the needle, that kind of feeds back into SA, that gives people more comfort and more conviction that they need to be getting involved here. That's obviously tying in with the theme of political tension around the world, the sort of centralized states basically beginning to come apart at the seams, decentralized technologies fitting into that nicely, and obviously central banks are just looking to go more deeply negative and create more liquidity to try and keep the economy kind of chugging along. I think these big themes are going to come together to just drive a big wave of adoption. So I'm pretty bullish, you know, personally. I think some of the predictions that are out there for a good like 10x return on Bitcoin in the next 3 years, I think seem quite fair, you know, very, very comfortably. And it'll be interesting to see what other themes kind of come into that. You know, the last cycle you saw things like ICOs coming in. It's going to be interesting to see what else comes in. I'm surprised that some of the crypto assets that are still in the top 10, like you know, Litecoin and XRP and Monero and some of these things, I'm not too sure what they're used for and who's connecting up to those networks, because most of what I see is interest in Bitcoin. interest in Ethereum and DeFi, and I'm not seeing a lot else. So I'm quite interested to see how the cycle plays out. But, you know, I'm not going to make any predictions on that for now. But I think Bitcoin stays dominant, does well, sees a lot of corporate and institutional interest as a result of all these dislocations, macro and politically, around the world.
Bullish, but measured also. I think that's fair.
I just lost you there.
Bullish, but also measured. I think you're pretty spot on with that overall narrative. And then finally, kind of a fun one to close out, just a recommendation. Can be kind of a restaurant, food, something to see culturally in SA for people who haven't been, or maybe looking to get over there at some point after this pandemic has been gotten through. Recommendation for SA.
Oh man, I think people need to go to Cape Town. People need to see the Cape, Table Mountain.
Yeah.
Going to the winelands, check out our wine farms in the mountains there. It's a beautiful place. The garden route is amazing. Incredible beaches, really good golfing. This movie, I don't know if you saw it on Netflix. This My Octopus Teacher was also filmed on the coast here in Cape Town.
Is that the one there's some controversy about in the last couple of days?
Yeah, no, I saw that too. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
So yeah, those are good things to see. And then, you know, if people are out here, they need to also get to one of our game reserves. We've got incredible game reserves in the north. So the Cape Town coastal regions are quite different to the northern Highveld, where you get your elephants and lions and giraffes and the big five, you know, and so people need to come up and see that as well.
All right, great recommendations. Cape Town, beautiful Cape Town, and game reserves in the north. Good stuff. Well, Chris, thanks for your time. Really enjoyed talking, and we'll have to do this again when there's more to talk about in SA.
Right, John. Good talking.